Hey folks, Chris Vandeviver here from WhyLogicProRules.com, the website that helps you get the most you can out of Apple's Logic Pro 10. And today, I want to dig into a logic myth that is perpetuated over and over again online, and it's just simply not true. And that is that, you've worked really hard on a mix, you've got everything where you want it, and so you hit Command B to bounce your track because, you got like 50, 100 tracks, whatever. And you've got to come out with a stereo track, one stereo track that you can upload to iTunes or wherever. And so you fire, you hit OK, it bounces, but you feel like that the bounce somehow sounds a little different than your mix. And this is the myth that I want to deal with because there are people out there who do believe that there is a difference. And the answer is, it depends. But it's not Logic's fault for that reason. So let's dig into this a little bit. I've got a drum track here, and I've got no processing whatsoever on this session. Let me pull up my mixer so you can see there's nothing going on. We're starting from square one here. Got this drum track, and I'm going to bounce this drum track. I'm going to select it, and I'm going to use Command B. And I'm not going to dig into everything within the bounce dialog because that's outside the scope of this video, but I want to point out that I'm going to use PCM, and the file format I'm going to choose is WAV. WAV is a file format that just about anybody can read. I use WAV when I send my tracks out to get mastered. It's just, if you want the truest to your mix file format, you want to use WAV. And I'm going to keep the resolution at 24-bit. The only time that I mess around with bit size is when it's the final mastered track. Otherwise, it's 24-bit. I don't ever fuss around with 32-bit. 16 is strictly for the final master, and you're going to want to use dithering if you're going to go that far. But again, outside the scope of this video, it's just PCM, file format WAV, 24-bit, and I always use a sample rate of 44.1. That's just the way I roll. And I'm going to do an offline bounce here. Real time is when, I hit OK and it's going to literally play the track as it bounces. So you can hear this. And it's a good practice. Other DAWs, this used to be called, or continues to be called, printing the track. And it's like Logic is recording the whole mix to a stereo track, so to speak. So you're listening to the whole mix while it plays back. And that's a good practice because you might catch things that you forgot about, levels might be a little off or panning or whatever. And it's a good exercise in double checking your mixes. But I roll with offline. I'm always very happy with offline. Normalize set to off. Okay, we're going to hit OK. And we're going to bounce. So we'll call it 2018 sample 1. Okay, we're going to bounce this. And it should show up right here in the Finder. So sample 1, I'm going to drag it in. So to demonstrate that Logic is, authentic and maintains the integrity of your mixes, we're going to do what is called the Null Test. And the Null Test is where we take the gain plugin, and you can put it on either. You can put it on the stereo output of your mix, your submix, or you can put it on the bounce, which is much easier. So I put a gain plugin on the bounce, and I'm going to invert the phase of both the left and the right channels of this track. And what should happen when I hit play, I'm going to have both tracks play back at the same time. So imagine that I don't have one track, but I've got 50 of a whole mix. I'm going to play that whole mix back, and I'm going to play the bounce side by side with it, but the phase inverted. And the idea here is if these are identical, nothing about your mix has been changed by the bounce feature. When we invert the phase, it should cancel each other out. So you shouldn't hear anything. So I'm going to play back this drum track, and I'm going to introduce the bounce with the phase inverted. And you can see that the meters are still going. It's playing, but they perfectly cancel out. Okay, so let me get rid of this track, and we'll even add some EQ. I'm not going to be very particular. I'm going to do some weird EQing here. I'm going to add a compressor. And once again, let's bounce. So Command B, we'll call this sample 2. I'm going to bring the finder in, sample 2. All right. And once again, let's bring that gain plug in, phase invert. Let's hear this. Here we go. Perfect. It nulls out. You might hear, something pop in when you hit stop or play initially, but while it's playing back, they cancel out. Okay. So easy peasy. Bounce is awesome. It does exactly what you need it to do. And what's awesome about offline bounce is that it's much faster than recording your whole mix to a stereo track and then having to play it from beginning to end. However, there are people who have tried the null test. They've done a whole mix and it doesn't null. And there's an explanation for that. But let's bring in drummer to demonstrate. I'm going to bring in drummer. I'm going to have a rock drummer. So Kyle should pop up here. And I'm going to bring in another drummer, the exact same one, rock Kyle. Okay. So as you can see, yeah. And then if we listen to the other Kyle, so these should be identical for all intents and purposes. Let me throw the gain plugin on Kyle number 2, phase invert, right? So these should null. These should cancel when I hit playback. Here we go. Well, that's freaking weird. These are the same parts. They're played by the same drummer. I haven't done anything in terms of playing with the parameters of drummer, and yet they don't cancel. What's up with that? Well, the deal is that there are certain processors that Logic and third-party plugins have developed that are non-linear. What does non-linear mean? That means that there are slight variations. There's random activity going on, even though it's very slight. Even if you listen to drummer 1 time, 2 times, 100 times, and it always sounds the same, there's in fact some sort of mathematical algorithm type of thing going on in the background that makes this slightly random each and every time, even when you play the same track back against each other. That's what makes drummer beautiful, is that it is mimicking the behavior of a real human drummer. So they don't cancel out. If you're not convinced, let me bounce in place each track real quick. Okay, I haven't changed anything about these tracks. Let me bring up the mixer just to demonstrate. I removed the gain plugin, so they shouldn't be even attempting to cancel out. Let me bring in the gain plugin again. Invert the phase of drummer number 2. The original drummer tracks are muted. Here we go. And you can hear it. Random behavior is causing these tracks. Even when I bounce them in place, there's something slightly different about each that prevents them from nulling. And that's why some people are led to believe that Logic's bounce is not true to the integrity of their mixes. It's not Logic's fault. It's that if there are certain processors in your mix that are changing constantly over time, a bounce is like a snapshot, but drummer or alchemy is another example. Things are changing constantly and prevents Logic from being able to completely null, because one's a snapshot and one is ever evolving. I want to show you some other examples of nonlinear processors that will mess with your tracks, or excuse me, mess with your bounces. Okay, I'm going to bring in just an audio track. I'm going to introduce the test oscillator, okay? It might be kind of loud. Be prepared. In fact, I'll just set the stereo output to nothing so we don't have to deal with that. So test oscillator. So as you can see, there's a signal. We just can't hear it because I'm sparing you. And I'm going to bring in a plugin I really like, SoundToys' Little Micro Shift. Okay, this is a plugin that pitch shifts a signal. And I'm going to leave the mix set to 100. And I'm going to duplicate this track. Now on each one of these tracks, I'm going to introduce our multimeter plugin. And it's important to point out that I want these set to stereo. So I'm going to set it to stereo. Let me pop up with the mixer. Actually, let's set this to a full scale of 100. And I'm going to set it to the goniometer within the multimeter. I'm going to introduce the second version of the multimeter. So everything is the same so far. You can already see that the activity of the micro shift is not exactly the same between the two tracks. It's actually kind of different, right? So I might introduce this output now. Okay. I'll bring both signals down. Okay, you can see that they're alternating at different times. Now let's bring in a gain plugin. And once again, invert the phase. Interesting. We can still hear them. I inverted the phase. They should be identical. Let's bring the mix to 50% on each one. Come on, you can do it. Okay. And then 50% on the other one. So you can get a pretty clear picture of what the heck is going on here. They're flipping all over the place due to the pitch shifting, the time shifting. They're not identical. They're doing it at different times. I've inverted the phase, right? But yet, it actually sounds more canceled with the phase not inverted, but they're never going to cancel. Yet again, here's an effect that is playing with these tracks, and thus the null test isn't going to work. I've got one more for you, and I'm going to introduce Slate's virtual tape machine. Okay, I'm going to remove the little micro shift, introduce the tape machine again. Okay, I've got the phase inverted on the one track. We got tape machine, 2 multimeters. Now, I'm going to ask you, you might not hear anything right now, but crank up the volume on your speakers or headphones, and you will hear a slight sound kind of ebbing in and out. That is the nonlinear behavior of Slate's VTM changing over time. It's emulating a tape machine, and so there's irregular behavior. There's random behavior when it comes to tape. And so it's emulating that. Once again, if you're putting the VTM or something like it all over your mixes, it's not going to know. So the point being of all this is there are virtual instruments, there are reverbs, like Chromaverb has a preset called 80s nonlinear. It's going to do the same exact thing. There's all sorts of processors that are designed very intentionally to not produce the same behavior over and over again. Even if you can't tell, even if it's so slight you can't tell, it's still attempting to mimic real life and the inconsistencies of real life and the variables of real life. So don't be led to believe that Logic's bounce feature is inadequate, that it can't produce the type of bounce that is quality for your mixes, for mastering, etc. It can, it does, it's great. It's just these other processors are duping or tricking the null test. So I hope that was helpful to you. If it was, as always, please subscribe to the YouTube channel. Please subscribe to the website whylogicprorules.com. The link is down below. Thank you so much.